Hello. Thank you very much for the introduction, Stefanos. Thank you to all of you for being here today, for my colleagues that are here also presenting. It's a great opportunity for me to be here and to share some information about the work that we do at our program and to try to help support throughout the world. So as I'm going to be talking today, I want to talk just a little bit about the multidisciplinary response. I'm going to build on some of the things that Carl has talked about. I also want to relate to how that is a trauma-informed and model and also based on the rights of children. I also want to talk some just about what we know briefly about the outcome of those programs and the impact it has on children. And then I want to talk a little more specifically about forensic interviews and information related to conducting those meaningful forensic interviews. So first, let me just back up a moment. I've been working in the Child Advocacy Center arena for about 24 years. So most of my professional career has been working in this multidisciplinary approach to child abuse. And I didn't come to it by accident, I came to it on purpose. I started off my career actually working in a children's hospital. And in the children's hospital, I was doing research half-time, and half-time I was providing therapy for families where there had been sexual abuse within the family. And during that situation, there was no multidisciplinary program of any significance where I was. And I had a 13-year-old girl who was a client of mine. And as I was providing therapy for her, she had been sexually abused by her father on 2 occasions. 2 times he had come into her bedroom at night and touched her between the legs. And in the grand scheme of things, maybe not the most significant experience that some children may have. But for her, she was quite traumatized by this. And I was seeing her in therapy, and one day in therapy, she looked at me and she said, and I'll never forget this, she said, "You know, what my dad did was wrong, and there's a part of me that will never forgive him for what he did. But what the system did to me and my family was worse than what my dad did." Which just caused my heart to stop. And I thought, it should be if you're a child and your father comes in your room and puts his hand between your legs and touches you in a sexual way, that should be one of the worst things that happens to you. However, for her, it wasn't the case. At worst, that was the second worst thing. The worst thing that happened to her was the way the system, and I mean broad system, had responded to this situation. And it caused me just to think about this over and over, about how can it be that here I am doing research, doing therapy, but the kids that I'm trying to help have been not only traumatized by whatever abuse they've experienced, but also traumatized by a system. That's not right. That just can't be right. So it takes me to the next point. My entire professional career as far as motivation comes from that experience. So 2 fundamental questions I want to ask you. Do you think that children have the right to grow up free from abuse and neglect? Yes, right? How can you argue any other point? The second question is, if children have been abused, do they have the right to receive services to help them heal from their experience? In a just, civil world, the answer has to be yes. So the first one, what can we do about that first one? The first one is hard, because that means basically what we're saying is we're going to prevent all child abuse from happening. And that's really hard. We're not there yet. We haven't figured that out. We're working towards it, but we don't know. But set that one aside. That one's a little bit out of our control. The second one, it's 100% our responsibility. Whether children are re-victimized by a system, whatever system it is that's in place, is all on us. It is our responsibility. It's under our control. So if we don't live up to what we need to do with number 2, how are we any better than the person who's doing number 1? This is a human rights issue. Kids are violated by those who sexually abuse them. And then if we, as the system, do worse than what they did, at least in the eyes of our victims? How are we any better, and what have we taught them? And we've all committed a collective human rights violation. So this is not just about child abuse. This is about dignity and human rights and what every child deserves. At our center, if we ever faced with a difficult situation, we ask the simple question, what would I want if this was my child? So from a victim's rights perspective, I want to introduce you to Bud Kramer. Bud Kramer was the prosecuting attorney in the community where I am, Huntsville, Alabama. Sweet home, Alabama. Yeah. He was the prosecuting attorney, and he was very frustrated because what he was seeing is kids, when they finally made it to court, they were traumatized, they didn't want to talk anymore, he couldn't effectively prosecute cases, and he started to debate, how is it that this is happening? And his experience was in some way similar to mine, and he said, we've got to do a better way. There's got to be a better way to address this issue. And everything that I'm going to talk about, everything about the CAC model is based on these two basic concepts. Number one, whatever the system does, it's actually got to help kids and not cause them more harm. Remember my 13-year-old, what the system did to me was worse than what my dad did to me. So whatever the system does, it actually has to help kids and not cause them further harm. And the second is, the only way we can do this is with a multidisciplinary approach. We can't just have law enforcement handle this issue. We can't just have medical professionals handle this issue. We just can't have child protection individuals handle this issue. We can't just have mental health. We can't just have law enforcement. It's got to be everybody. Everybody plays a role. Everybody must play a role if we're to be able to provide the necessary services for children to heal from this experience and to hold folks accountable. Now, Bud Kramer went on to be elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. Now, I know we could have a long presentation about American politics right now. He was a good politician. He fought for very good things and did a lot of really good things to advocate for victims of crime. He was the author of the Victims of Child Abuse Act, and a lot of other legislation that help protect the rights of children. I'll come back to him in a moment. So there's a bit of a tension point here, because in the Child Advocacy Center model, it's part about getting the bad guy, but it's also about helping the child. And which of those is more important? It's difficult. I'll give you an example. We had a case recently with a man who was a foster father. He had foster children in his home. He had received awards for his work as a foster parent, and he sexually abused two of the boys, age 6 years old. Between the ages of 6 and 8, he sexually abused these two boys. Now, the case is going to court. We've done forensic interviews, we've done medical exams, the case is going to court, and suddenly the prosecutor says we need to offer a plea bargain, which a person can plead guilty, and the person's only going to get probation. Probation for sexually abusing a 6 and an 8-year-old boy. Seems like it's kind of a light slap on the wrist, not necessarily an appropriate punishment for someone who has sexually abused two boys when he's supposed to be providing care for them, correct? Facts that you don't know. Both boys in therapy. Both boys still highly traumatized by this experience. Both boys now 10 years old saying, if you force me to testify in court, I'm going to kill myself. Who in here would be willing to roll the dice and say, I think the child's just bluffing. Let's go ahead and have them testify in court. And if they kill themselves, well, I'll just say I screwed up. Right? That is not acceptable. So sometimes getting the bad guy has to be taken into attention. What's the right thing to do for the child? How good are we as a system is if we sacrifice children just to prosecute a case? We cause them more harm. Our job is to help children, help them, but also, in helping them, we can get the bad guy. This is where it all began as far as the Child Advocacy Center. This was the first Child Advocacy Center in the world. It's, because we're really bright, it's called the Little House because it was a little house. Highly descriptive. And this is in downtown Huntsville, and it is, we've sold it and moved on from there long ago to a nice big campus. But this is where the whole model started. And instead of children having to go to lots of different places that they've never been before and talk to lots of different people that they've never seen before and always continually have to miss things or be scared to death when they're going all these places, why not have all those professionals come to one child-friendly setting And in that child-friendly setting, we actually can provide all the services they need, much like Carl was talking about with the different rooms. So in the United States, there's 10 standards for a child advocacy center. This is actually, if you were a child in Huntsville, Alabama, and there was allegations of sexual abuse, severe physical abuse, or witness to murder, or any form of violence, this is where you would come. All of our referrals, all kids who come to us either through law enforcement or through our child protective services when an allegation is made. And they come to this setting. The idea is to have a child-appropriate, child-friendly setting. This is actually our waiting room, so when you walk in, this is what you would see. It's a child-friendly setting. It is intended to make children feel comfortable. It's not intended to look like a facility or a government office. It's dirty, it's comfortable, it's relaxing. It also has locked doors. The first door opens, the second door is locked, because a lot of times children may be afraid the person who abused them will try to come get them. Further, the alleged perpetrator is never allowed to come. Whoever the alleged perpetrator is, they're not part of this experience for the child. They are not allowed to be there when the child is there. Our feeling is, who would disclose if the perpetrator is sitting right out in the waiting room? Now, if you can see behind the desk, there's kind of a checkerboard. Those are all tiles. Those are tiles, and you can also see a chair rail that goes all the way around the entire building. Those were tiles that were painted at a local arts festival by children in the community. They painted these tiles, and it really is to help communicate that this is a place for children. This is somewhere comfortable. The second component of a child advocacy center in the United States is the forensic interview, and this is where it all starts. This is the beginning of almost every child abuse case, especially sexual abuse, begins with a forensic interview. Depending on what happens in that forensic interview will dictate oftentimes whatever the police are going to do with an investigation, what Child Protective Services will do with an investigation. Those interviews are done by specially trained staff that are our staff. We're an NGO. Everybody we work with is government, but as an NGO, we're doing the interview. You can see the interview room. That's actually our interview room that we interview younger children in. We have our staff member in there and the child. That's the only people in there. In the observation room will be a detective from police, and then a Child Protective Services investigator, and possibly an assistant district attorney or a prosecutor, depending on the situation. We conduct the forensic interview. It's recorded. It is done according to our forensic interview model, which I'll talk about in a second. And those interviews are then used as evidence, but also to help guide the rest of the investigation. So what is a forensic interview? This is a definition. I take this definition from a document I'll show you in just a moment, but there's some important components here. First, a forensic interview is a developmentally sensitive, so it has to be based on the developmental status of the child, and legally sound, meaning that the questions are asked are of an appropriate nature that you can justify why every one of them was asked, and they will stand up in the court of law. Method of gathering factual information. We want the truth to come out. If abuse happened, we want to know that. If it didn't happen, we want to know that too. So we're about gathering factual information, that the professional doing the interview is a neutral professional, doesn't want to necessarily go this way or that way, is just trying to elicit as much information, that we're using research and practice-informed techniques, and this is part of a larger investigation. We feel like this is a comprehensive, good description of what exactly is happening in a forensic interview. In our model, there's a two-stage model with the forensic interview. There's obviously not enough time to address this in this short presentation, but it begins with introductions and early engagement. It includes interview instructions, narrative practice, which is a standard part of all the forensic interview protocols, moves into the topic of concern through transition, using narrative cues to elicit a free narrative from the child to the best of our ability, and then asking follow-up questions. This is a model that is very consistent with other models that are out there, and the amount of literature that supports what we're doing in our model is significant. We've been training on this model, developing it for over 20 years at the National Children's Advocacy Center. And sometimes people say, well, what if the child won't separate from their mother? What if the mother is supposed to be in the room? What if the mother wants to come in there, the child does? In our model, it's the child and our forensic interviewer. But I'll tell you about a case we had recently. There was a child who was having difficulty separating from the mom. The mom was going to be talking to our victim advocate down the hall. So the victim advocate and the interviewer came up with a novel idea. They tied a string around mom's finger, and they let the child walk with the string from where their victim advocate was meeting with mom, down the hall, around the corner, into the interview room, and then they tied the other end of the string to the child's finger. And then they had the child pull the string slightly, and it instructed mom, when you feel that, then you pull back. And so the child at times in the interview would pull the string, and then she would suddenly feel a little tug. Her mom's not influencing what she's saying in the interview, but her mother is communicating to her, I'm here for you, I'm not deserting you, I've got your back. It's small tweaks like that that can make this work so powerful. So I want to share with you, this is a document. I was traveling internationally. I brought as many as I could pack in my bag, and they're up here. So first come, first serve. But this is a document that was published by the U.S. Department of Justice recently on child forensic interviewing best practices. It was written, we were the lead authors on it, but it included 5 of the leading forensic interview training schools in the United States who all came together, and we identified what are the best practices in forensic interviewing so that we could consolidate all the research and our practice. And these are people who every day were doing forensic interviews plus training on the models. So hopefully that can be a good resource for you. Let me move on to medical exams. Medical exams are critically important. It's not about gathering evidence most of the time. Most of the time, we don't find evidence in a medical exam. What we do is we can make a big impact. We may identify other medical issues that have not been previously diagnosed that the child may need help with. We may be able to provide support to that child. Oftentimes, if we know about dynamics of child sexual abuse, children feel like after they've been abused, my body's been impacted. It's different. Something's changed. People can look at me. They can tell I'm damaged goods. I'm never going to be the same again. And for a doctor or a physician or a medical professional to share with them, your body is perfectly okay, that can be very therapeutic for children. So Carl already had this slide up, amazingly the same language almost, about the role of the different teams. At our center, our teams are co-located. So co-located with us in the same campus, we have police, prosecutors. All of us are there together, co-located, making sure we're collaborating. Mental health, we do all the mental health, forensic interviews, medical, all in one child-friendly setting. Mental health, we talked about this. It's critically important. At any one time, we have over 100 kids in therapy for using evidence-based treatment, and our treatment outcomes are outstanding. Victim advocacy and support is absolutely critical in our field, and it's not just about holding their hand. It's about guiding them on a very scary tour. Imagine you're going on a very scary mountain climb and you've never done it before. Having a guide who's experienced, who's taken people through the mountain, who know the path, who can help lead the way and provide confidence is an incredibly empowering situation. And that's what our victim advocates do. The connection, I wish I had time, I could have played you a video of 2 moms who recorded a 7-minute video about their experience at the center and what it meant to them and their daughters. Very powerful. We have some other models, the case review, and related to the multidisciplinary team, we have a whole protocol about how all these agencies, how are we going to work together? Because by nature, we're going to split apart. But we have to be very intentional to work together, and we meet on a weekly basis to discuss cases. We actually talk all the time via text or just in person. And then case tracking, organizational capacity is another one, which is about supporting the organization, but also the staff that are working there, because secondary traumatic stress is a huge issue. Don't have time to get into that today. And then being culturally competent. Making sure we meet every child and family where they are. Don't make them fit into our culture, but we fit into their culture for where they are. So is this a best practice? Carl already said yes. Let me reemphasize one point that Carl didn't make, and I have another thing that I brought. This is a one-pager called The Efficacy of Children's Advocacy Centers. For every case, we save over $1,300 for every investigation. That's because we coordinate activities. And when you eliminate things that are duplicative, then you can make it be more efficient. So we're about creating a more efficient system, so better outcomes, and we save money. I would venture to say it would be rare for you to find a situation where you can say we're going to have a coordinated response, where we're going to have better outcomes, and it's going to save you money. But that's what we find with the CAC model. Also, importantly, Stephanos, I know you're getting ready to yell at me, but I'm getting close. For families who come, 95% of the families served at CAC said they felt a sense of healing from their experience there. And 97% of them said, if I had someone who I knew, who I cared about, and had a situation like this, I would tell them about the CAC. Now, I don't know what kind of grades you made in school. I didn't make 95s and 97s, so that's pretty good to me. And for the multidisciplinary team, this is those police officers, child protection, medical, mental health. 98% say they feel like this coordinated approach allows them to do their job better. The science is there. We know that this is working. I can see it every single day in my work. But let me tell you, this is the map of the U.S. This is where CACs are now. There's more than 950 in the U.S., served over 350,000 children last year alone. This model has revolutionized our nation's response to child sexual abuse, in my opinion. And David mentioned earlier the decline. But all that is great. Let me just tell you a very quick story, show you one picture, and I'm out of here. 12-year-old kid, girl, discloses that her mom's brother, her uncle, has sexually abused her. She is brought to the Child Advocacy Center. At the Child Advocacy Center, she has a forensic interview done. After the forensic interview, the investigative team is meeting to discuss what happened next. And when they're having that conversation about what they're going to do, the child is left to kind of go outside, hang out in the waiting room. It's a beautiful day, and the child says, "Can I go outside and draw on the sidewalk?" And they said, "Sure, that'd be fine. Just make sure that whatever you write, it'd be okay for other kids to see, because we'll have other kids coming here today." So they finish up. She's out on the back steps drawing, and when they come out, this is the picture that they find. And I'll read it to you. The bottom step, it says, "When you step here, you have faith." The second step says, "When you step here, you have hope." The third step says, "When you step here, you are not afraid." The fourth step says, "When you step here, you are loved." And the last step says, "When you step here, you are ready." So I don't know if you believe in research, but that is hard to deny. That girl, that 12-year-old girl, one of the most eloquent things I've ever seen in my life, tells the story to the next kid walking up those steps. That first step is scary, and you got to have faith to get there. But by the time you get to that top step, you're ready. These folks are going to take care of you. And so you, all of you, the smile of the child, you're a part of making this happen on a worldwide scale. So for that, I thank you for what you do, and thank you for your time to come and speak with you today.